Today we are going to be covering lesson 2.06, Solve Literal Equations. Our goals for today are to solve a formula for a specific variable. So for example, the distance formula d equals rt can be solved for rate, which is r, and t, which is time, in addition to distance d. So we can take this equation and rearrange it so the r is by itself or so the t is by itself. So our goal is to solve literal equations for a specified variable. So what you should already know how to do from this unit is addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and subtraction properties of equality. So this is when we do the inverse or opposite operations to help us solve an equation. The commutative property of addition and multiplication. This is whatever we do to one side, we have to do to the other. Distributive property. Remember, distribute is a fancy word of saying multiply. So this is when we distribute something through. Inverse operations. So remember, inverse of like addition is subtraction, of multiplication is division. Multiple transformations, how to simplify, and how to isolate the variable. So just a quick solving equations review. So we're going to go through 3 examples here before we get to solving a literal equation. Now when we're solving a literal equation, it's going to be very similar to solving an equation. We're just going to have multiple variables, so we're going to have multiple letters in our equation. So we're just going to have to do some rearranging, but we're still going to be doing inverse operations to help us solve. So if we take a look at number 1, 2x plus 5 equals 21. There's nothing we can do to simplify on the left-hand side or the right-hand side of the equal sign, so we have to do inverse operations. Remember, we want to do like reverse orders of operations, so undo any addition and subtraction first. So we're going to subtract 5 since that was adding 5. And that leaves us with 2x equals 21 minus 5, which is 16. Now this 2x means 2 times x, so to get rid of that multiplication, we divide by that same number. 2 divided by 2 cancels out, and that leaves us with x is equal to 8. So the variable is all by itself on one side of that equal sign. For number 2, we have 3x minus 1 all divided by 4 equals 2. So when we have this situation here, remember we want to treat this division bar, it's going over the whole thing. So we think of the numerator as parentheses. That's all one grouping by itself. So we can't do anything with that yet until we get rid of this dividing by 4. So the inverse operation is division, is multiplication. So we multiply both sides by 4, and now we're left with 3x minus 1 is equal to 8. Now our problem is very similar to number 1. We're going to undo addition and subtraction first. So since this is minus 1, we add 1 to both sides of the equal sign. We have 3x is equal to 9. And then we have 3 times x, so divide both sides by 3. X is equal to 3. And lastly, number 3, we have 2 times that whole group. X plus 4 is equal to 10. So for this one, we could do a couple of things. We could distribute that 2 through to the x and to the 4. But this case, that's going to give us a couple extra steps if we do that. So if we think about it, and we go back to number 2, we had 3 times x equals 9. Think about this here. We have 2 times this group equals 10. So if we divide both sides by 2 first, those 2's divide out, and we're left with x plus 4 is equal to 5. Now we just need to undo that addition by using subtraction. And we have x is equal to 1. So remember, we're going to use these same concepts when we're solving literal equations. So even though there's going to be another variable or even a couple more variables involved, we're still going to be using these same concepts. Something to keep in mind. We are going to be working with formulas that contain multiple variables. So when you're working with these formulas that contain 3 or more variables, make sure you remember which variable you are solving for throughout the transformations. So think, what variable are you solving for? This is the variable you need to get by yourself. Everything else has to move to the opposite side of that equal sign. We're going to go ahead and get into our like quiz questions, and we're going to do a couple different variations for each quiz question so you have a few examples to help you out. So for this one, we need to solve for t, and we have r is equal to 4 times pi times s times t. So we are multiplying 4 pi s and t together. We are trying to get t by itself, so we want to look at, well, what's being done to the t? Well, what's being done is that we're multiplying 4 pi and s times that t. So if we think about the inverse operation of multiplying all those things times the t, we know the inverse operation is division. So if we divide by those things, the 4, the pi, and the s, whatever we do to one side, we have to do to the other. Those 4's will divide out, those pi's divide out, the s's divide out, so we're left with r is equal to 4 pi s, or excuse me, r over 4 pi s is equal to t. Or if we switch it so that our variables on the left-hand side, we'll get t is equal to r over 4 times pi times s. Now the t is all by itself, so that is what we need to do. The one thing to keep in mind with literal equations is that your answer is not necessarily going to look more simple or simplified than the original problem. These are just rearranging the problems to solve for that specified variable. So keep that in mind when you're solving for them. We're not going to get an exact number for our variable. So let's look at another example. This is just like quiz question number 1. So we need to solve for d. We have c is equal to 7 times pi times a times d. We need to get the d by itself. That's our ultimate goal. Solve for d. So we look at what's being done to the d. We're multiplying by 7, pi, and a. So if we divide by 7, pi, and a, whatever we do to one side, we have to do to the other. Those 7's divide out, pi's divide out, a's divide out. So we're left with c over 7 pi a is equal to d. Or if we put the d on the left-hand side, d is equal to c over 7 pi a. Looking at like quiz question number 2, we need to solve for y if we have w times y plus z is equal to x. So remember, this one we want to get y by itself. So we want to keep that in mind as we are solving for this. So just a little hint for quiz question number 2, your quiz wants you to distribute the w first, or whatever letter is there. They want you to distribute the w first. It's going to be easier for you when you are trying to select the correct solution. Because you might find the correct solution if you do it the other way. It just might look a little bit different, even though it's the same thing. So distribute the w first, Remember, distribute is a fancy word for saying multiply. So that's going to give us wy plus wz is equal to x. Now we want to keep in mind we're still getting that y by itself. So now from here, if we're multiplying something times the y and then adding something, we need to always undo that addition first. So we're first going to subtract that wz from both sides. Now notice I did not line it up underneath the x. And the reason I didn't do that is because they're not like terms, so we can't combine them. So what it looks like is it will have wy is equal to x minus wz. This is where it's different than in those examples we were looking at the beginning, because we were able to just combine those like terms and simplify those constants. So just be careful on that. So now we have w times y is equal to x minus wz. So we are multiplying the w and the y. So inverse operation is division. Divide both sides by w. So we're left with y is equal to x minus wz over w. And the y is by itself. We're good to go. So let's look at another example like that just to help us get some more practice. So for this one, we want to solve for r. Our ultimate goal is to get the r by itself. And just like in that earlier one, your quiz wants you to distribute the s first. So distribute means to multiply. So we have s times t minus s times r is equal to u. Now we need to undo any addition or subtraction from here. So we're adding st to this negative sr. So we need to subtract this group of st. So now we're left with negative sr is equal to u minus st. So we have negative s times r is equal to u minus st. So to get rid of that multiplying of the negative s, we'll divide by negative s to both sides. So we have r is equal to u minus st over negative s. And that is it. The r is by itself. All right, so looking at like quiz question number 3. Our ultimate goal, we want to get d by itself. So after like quiz question number 2, this one's kind of a nice one. We have c is equal to 5b plus 5d. So there's nothing we can distribute, nothing we can simplify. So let's undo any addition or subtraction. So this is a positive 5b. So we'll subtract 5b from both sides of the equal sign. So on the left-hand side, we're left with c minus 5b is equal to 5 times d. 5 times d, so in order to get rid of that multiplication, divide both sides by 5. So we're left with c minus 5b over 5 is equal to d. Or if we write the variable on the left-hand side, we have d is equal to c minus 5b over 5. So let's look at another one like quiz question number 3. We want to solve for w. So our ultimate goal is to get the w by itself. So looking at this, we have 6 times w plus 6z. So undo addition and subtraction. Subtracting 6z from both sides of the equal sign. So we have x minus 6z is equal to 6w. Divide both sides by 6. So we have x minus 6z over 6 is equal to w, or if we rearrange it, w is equal to x minus 6z over 6. And we have solved for w. For light quiz question number 4, it states a trapezoid has the formula a equals h times a plus b all divided by 2, where the two bases are a and b and the height is h. For this one, we want to solve for a. So our ultimate goal is to get this lowercase a by itself. So now we need to look at what's being done to that a. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to bring that whole formula down here. Okay, so we've talked about this before. If we have a whole number like this h times a fraction, the whole number gets multiplied times the numerator here. So this is kind of like h times that a plus b all divided by 2. So the first thing we can get rid of is we're multiplying the h and we're dividing by that 2. We can multiply both sides by 2. So that's going to leave us with 2a is equal to h times a plus b. Now we just have this h times this group a plus b, so we need to get rid of that multiplication by dividing both sides by h. So now we're left with 2a over h is equal to a plus b. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to actually bring this whole thing up here so we have more space. Now, what's being done to that a? Remember, we're looking for, we need to get the lowercase a by itself. So what's being done to that a is we're adding b. So now we're going to subtract b from both sides. So on the left-hand side now, we have this 2a plus h first. So 2a over h first minus b is equal to a. And then if we want to just have our variable on the left-hand side, it's a is equal to 2a divided by h all minus b. Before we move forward, I want to take a look at something. Looking at, are these the same formula? So do these all indicate the same formula? These are what we were just working with, the area of the trapezoid. A is equal to h times a plus b, all divided by 2. And we have the second one here. A is equal to 1/2 h times a plus b. And this last one, a is equal to a plus b divided by 2 times h. Well, this first one here and this last one look very similar. Just notice that the h on the first one comes first, and on the second one it comes second. So let's think about multiplication. If we were multiplying 4 times 2, that's going to give us 8, right? Well, what if we multiply 2 times 4? That still gives us 8. So it gives us the same thing no matter what the order is. Now this is true with that multiplication there. This is that commutative property. We could switch it, doesn't matter. So we know for sure the first one and the last one are the same. So now let's take a look at that second one here. We have 1/2 times h times a plus b. So let's look back at the top one, and let's look at what's being done here. If we were to, like I had said, we could put that h, it's being multiplied times the numerator, so that's like h times a plus b all divided by 2. If we wanted to separate this, so the numerator up here was not a part of the fraction, so what we would have is we would have h times a plus b times something over 2. Now, in order to not change the fraction, or to change the whole problem, that fraction, that numerator would just have to be 1. Because if we were to multiply h times a plus b times 1, that would just give us what we had back over here. Now, we know that with multiplication we can kind of switch things around and it still gives us the same thing. So h times a plus b times 1/2 is the same thing as 1/2 h times a plus b. So this is what I was saying in like quiz question number 2, when I said the quiz wants you to, for that particular question, wanted you to distribute first. And the reason being is because it would come out a specific looking way. Because as we just saw here, these three all mean the same thing. These are all the same formula, they're just written a little bit differently. So if you were doing like quiz question number 2 and you didn't distribute first and you solved, you could still solve for it, but you might get something that looks like this when we needed it to look. This answer choices, because it's multiple choice, looked like this. So that's absolutely fine. You just have to kind of be able to rearrange it to get to the proper answer choice. So let's do some more like quiz questions just to have a couple more practice. So we have the trapezoid formula. A is equal to, notice this one looks a little bit different, the 1/2 times h times a plus b, where the two bases are a and b and the height is h. For this one, we need to solve for h. So our ultimate goal here is to get the h by itself. So once again, I'm just going to write this down here. Now let's look at what's being done to that h. We're multiplying the h by 1/2, and we're also multiplying the h by that a plus b. So let's first get rid of that multiplying by 1/2. Remember, to get rid of multiplication, we have to use division. When we're dividing by a fraction, though, remember this is where you multiply by its reciprocal. So we're going to multiply both sides by the reciprocal of 1/2, which is 2 over 1. So that leaves us with 2 times a, or 2a over 1 is equal to h times a plus b. Now we don't need to write that over 1, so we can just keep it as 2a is equal to h times a plus b. Now from here we have h times a plus b, so we need to get rid of that multiplication once again, and so we'll divide both sides by that group of a plus b. So that leaves us with 2a over a plus b is equal to h. Or if we just write the h on the left-hand side, h is equal to 2a over a plus b. And for like quiz question number 5, the formula for the perimeter of a rectangle is P is equal to 2 times L plus H. And we want to solve for L. So our ultimate goal is to get the L by itself. Just a little note, your quiz wants you to distribute by the 2 first. I'm going to show you both ways. If we don't distribute first, so we're going to do this one first, and then if we do distribute, and how we can manipulate them to still look the same. So if I bring this down here, so the first one we are not going to distribute the 2 first. We have P is equal to 2 times L plus W. So if we divide both sides by 2, because it's 2 times, that leaves us with P over 2 is equal to L plus W. We need to get the L by itself, so we're adding W to it, so let's subtract W from both sides. So we have P divided by 2 minus W is equal to L, or if we rearrange it, L is equal to P divided by 2 minus w. Okay, so that's if we did not distribute first. Let's see what happens if we distribute first. So we have p times 2, or excuse me, p equals 2 times L plus W. So if we distribute, remember the 2 gets multiplied by each of those, so we have p is equal to 2L plus 2W. So now there's no more multiplication in that, so we would subtract 2W from both sides of the equal sign. So we have p minus 2W is equal to 2L. Divide both sides by 2 here. So now we have p minus 2W over 2 is equal to L, or if we put the L on the left-hand side, L is equal to p minus 2W divided by 2. So if we take a look at our answers, over here we have L equals p divided by 2 minus W, and up here we have L is equal to p minus 2W all divided by 2. So they look a little bit different here. But anytime we have a fraction bar that goes over the whole thing, that means that each of our terms in our numerator have that fraction underneath it. So if I separate that, so we have L is equal to p over 2 minus 2W over 2, that's what we would get. And then we could simplify wherever we can. So notice there's a 2 and a 2, so those would divide out, leaving us with L is equal to p divided by 2 minus W. Notice those are the exact same. Also notice what I did on the right-hand side when I distributed. See how many more steps were involved with simplifying? And if you got to this point up here, your answer is absolutely correct. However, if you're doing multiple choice, they're not going to have this as a possibility and this, because they're the same answer. They're only going to have this. So you'd have to do a little bit more work to get from what you had down to here. So for number 5, do not distribute first. It's much quicker and it's going to get you the answer that they're looking for. And we're going to look at one more that's like quiz question number 5. The formula for the perimeter of a rectangle is t is equal to 1/2 times d plus h. And we want to solve for d. So for this one, if you have the quiz question that's like this, your quiz wants you to divide out by that 1/2 first, and that's what we're going to do. We're not going to distribute that 1/2 through. So we have t is equal to 1/2 times d plus h. Remember, when dividing by a fraction, we multiply by the reciprocal. The reciprocal of 1/2 is 2 over 1. You just flip the fraction. So that leaves us with 2 times t over 1, which we don't need to write the over 1, is equal to, those all divide out, d plus h. Now to get the d by itself, subtract h from both sides of that equal sign. That leaves us with 2t minus h is equal to d, or d is equal to 2t minus h. And that is it for like quiz question number 5. And that is it for today's lesson for 2.06. So if you feel ready, go ahead and take that quiz. Remember, you can use this recording while you're taking the quiz. Use your notes while you're taking the quiz. I suggest watching the recording for quiz question number 1, pausing it, and then taking quiz question number 1. And then like the recording for quiz question number 2, pause it, and take quiz question number 2. If you have any questions, feel free to email us. Otherwise, have a wonderful, wonderful day.